Let's get to the today's the first session is on the rubber industry in tech talk. For this, as I mentioned to you, this is a special talk on odor control. I think if you are from the rubber or tire industry, odor is one of the problem we experience in both the rubber and tire industries. We have Mr. Mirain Appelman. He is actually works for the sales of the Aerox, based in Netherlands. He born in Netherlands. He also actually his background is from the initial. He worked in the rubber industry in the beginning, and after that, he for the last 10 years he working for the Aerox. He's a specialist, experience in the olfactory, including laboratory management, olfactometry, sample analysis, and also very special in how he is very experienced in industrial odor control. So it will be a good opportunity for all of us to learn from Mr. Mirain Appelman about the odor control, how to solve odor problems in the rubber and tire industries. May I invite Mr. Mirain, please come forward. Hi there. Let me actually share the screen.
Hello there, and welcome to the rubber industry tech talk about odor control. That is my subject. My name is Mirain Appelman, and I will share my knowledge on odor removal in the rubber and tire industry. So I will discuss a few subjects, which you can see here. But first, I will start a little bit about the company profile of Aerox. So who is Aerox? Aerox is a company that is specialized in odor control for many years already. We are founded in the early 70s, and we had then a development of scrubbers and dust filters. After some time, a lot of people started working on using scrubbers, and also a lot of new companies developing scrubbers. Then we started producing a new type of odor control, which was widely used, and that is the system cold plasma. So actually, Aerox is the inventor of the cold plasma system. And by now, we have more than 250 of Aerox injectors installed worldwide, of which more than 50 in the rubber industry. A very important part of our product is that we are recognized as a best available technique, and that is that it is for companies quite easy to choose for the type of cold plasma technique. And then the environmental government, so the legislation, it will be automatically recognized as a good technique. So first I will tell something about odor control in general, and at this moment specifically about the Aerox injector. I will now show a movie, and after that I will explain how our system works. So what you just saw in the movie was that we create oxygen radicals. We have cold plasma units. You can see the cold plasma units in the left picture, on the top left picture. There's a high voltage on with which we create the plasma, and by blowing air through those plasma modules, we create oxygen radicals. You see in the middle picture, our system is connected to a process duct through which for example, the exhaust air from a curing department is emitted to outside, to the ambient air outside. You can see on the right side of the picture that we inject the oxygen radicals into the process duct by using a special adapter, and the particles that we inject into the process duct, they react with the odorous particles. They are the odorous particles are organic molecules, and they are partly oxidized by the particles that we inject. And therefore, because of this partly oxidation, we break the molecules into less odorous molecules, so that finally the smell is well, maybe 70, 80, or sometimes even 90% reduced. What is very typical in the rubber industry is that we change the way that the smell comes out of the chimney. So first you have a rubber smell from the process, but when we have treated the air, there's still a certain smell, but the typical rubber smell is gone. And this is quite important for a lot of rubber factories. So the Aerox injector can treat several types of air, several odor concentration, and also several amounts of air. So you can see that we can treat from about 5,000 cubic meters per hour up to 200,000 cubic meters per hour. How do we determine how much capacity we need? Because this is quite important, whether you need a small Aerox injector, small capacity, or a large Aerox injector. We can determine this by doing two types of tests. The first is a suitcase test. This is quite a small test, and this is more indicative. The second one, that is an official pilot test. So this is what we do often when clients are really interested in the system and also want to know exactly how much odor reduction can be achieved with their process. And we do such an official pilot test in many cases. And this is, maybe you would say, okay, for the tire production, every plant is approximately the same. But of course, you can have a lot of different ingredients, and all those ingredients, and every tire producer has its own recipe. So all these ingredients have an influence on the odor and also on the components that cause the odor. And this is why it's very important that we do a pilot test on every exhaust or for every specific client. So we know how much capacity is needed. The client knows how much odor reduction or how much odor removal he can expect. So this is quite a small test. We can ship this test all over the world. Besides this test, you need to have a laboratory who can perform odor measurements. This is normally done independently for us, so it is really an independent test. So having done such a test, you get for example, in this case, we have tested on 3 different capacities, and then you get such a typical graph. So for example, the lowest setting, we achieved an Odour reduction of 60%. The second one, the medium capacity, we achieved a reduction of 90%. And on the highest capacity, we even achieved a reduction of 95%. So this is a typical graph. In some cases, clients are already satisfied with 60% Odour reduction because this is enough to take away complaints from neighbors, or it could be enough to comply to legislation that they have from an environmental protection body. So this is quite a specific detail which you can see that Odour consultancy companies produce. So they put all the results of a test or of an official measurement. They can introduce this into a calculation model, and they can calculate Odour contours from a company. Well, in this specific case, we achieved an Odour reduction of 75%. So you can see without the Aerox injector that the air could be smelled quite widely around the company. And in the second one, there was only a small Odour contour left. Aerox is present in several industries. You can see the industries here. The rubber industry is getting more and more interesting for us because at this moment it is really a growing market. Due to Corona, we also saw that pet food, because many people also bought a pet during Corona. So also pet food companies are increasing at this moment. But rubber is increasing for quite some years now. So some key facts about the rubber industry. We had a first unit installed in 2006, and since then we installed about well, at least more than 50 units in the rubber tire industry. The processes that where we can achieve an Odour reduction, or that are relevant, better to speak, for Odour reduction are the mixing process, the batch off, and the curing process. So the mixing process, that is the air coming from a mixer is only process air. So therefore, the mixing chamber is of course not very big, and also to don't extract too much heat from the process, you only want to extract a little amount of air from the mixer. So a typical flow rate, what we see from a mixer that we treat, is about 5,000 to 30,000 cubic meters per hour. But since you add the ingredients, the natural rubber, synthetic rubber, and all kinds of specific ingredients, and the first reactions take place there, so a lot of odor is coming from this process. So you have a high odor concentration here. So with one of our systems, with one Aerox injector, we can treat a maximum of about 40,000 cubic meters per hour of exhaust air. Then the second part of the of the process which is relevant for odor control. Sometimes it is combined, since this is quite, the batch off is close to the mixing, of course. Sometimes the exhaust air is combined with the mixing, but in many cases it is also separate. So here we see a typical flow rate of about 20,000 to sometimes 150,000 cubic meters per hour. This is because in many cases there's a hood over the batch off process, and so it is not only process air but also some ambient air from the hole, which is extracted and vented outside. So therefore you have a medium volume flow rate and also a medium odor concentration. It is not as high as it is from the mixing process. So here you see a typical picture of a Aerox injector treating the air from the batch off process. So, and we are treating here about 100,000 cubic meters per hour. You see it is quite a small system to treat a big amount of air. Then the last one, the curing process. This is again completely different than the mixing process. We have here a low odor concentration, and that is because the mixing or the curing process is taking place in a hole. And when the presses open, you can see also on the pictures, the fumes from the tires, they in many cases just come into the hole. And the hole of where the curing process is extracted to keep the climate in the factory okay for the employees. But because the holes are in many cases quite big, you have a high volume flow rate. So sometimes it can be from 100,000 even up to 300,000 cubic meters per hour. So here you see on the left picture, you can see the red circle, and in this factory, if you look back on the picture, you see maybe 10 or even more of these extraction points extracting the fumes from the curing department. So in this specific tire factory, 18 of the Aerox injectors are treating each one 8,000 to 180,000 cubic meters of exhaust air coming from the curing lines. Each unit has a different capacity, of course. This is a typical picture of a combined exhaust air. So here the tire producer has made a central extraction point and is extracting in total 400,000 cubic meters of air coming from the curing department in two separate lines. So each 200,000, 220,000 cubic meters of exhaust air is treated by one Aerox injector. So the clients that we have in the rubber tire industry, it is mostly rubber tire, but also, for example, in the belt production. But clients we have are the Continental, Nexen, Bridgestone, Mitas, and Nokia. So here you can see some typical results that we achieve from the mixing process. So you see sometimes we achieve about 60, 65% up to 97%. And then you can also see that in the middle column in Odour units per cubic meter, you can see that especially at high concentrations, which is quite typical for the mixing process, so 20, 40,000, 50,000, we achieve a high odor reduction. And yeah, that is quite typical for our system. So with low concentrations, for example, the first one of about 1200 Odour units, then it's more difficult to achieve a high odor reduction. But even in that case, we can achieve a reduction of more than 60%. So then some examples for the curing. So you see also here a variation between 60 and 80%. The first one that was not a really rubber press, but this was the mold cleaning. So there was used a different substance. So this is not a really relevant measurement. And in other types, you see that there is a specific difference in odor concentration. So at the mixing, we had odor concentration of 10, maybe 10 to 40,000. And here you see it's maximum 1300 Odour units. So those concentrations are typical for the curing department. So some typical advantages of the cold plasma Aerox injector. So what is important specifically for the tire industry is that we have the injection principle. So the air is not going through our system because sometimes in the tire industry there's a lot of particles, a lot of dust in the process air, which can clog into existing filters or whatever. With the Aerox injector, our system cannot be, will not get dirty because we inject the radicals into the process duct. So it is also quite an environmental friendly product. We don't use gas, it is only electricity that we use. We also don't have any waste. We can treat big volumes, so up to 220,000 cubic meters per hour. This is of course quite interesting. And we have quite an efficient way of customer care by having a remote performance control, so we can proactively think with the client on servicing of the unit, or we can have a look when there are possible problems, so we can immediately act on this. So this was my my presentation about odor reduction, and I hope this was interesting.
Thank you, Mirain. It's a very interesting presentation. I think you address real issues about the, particularly in the rubber industry. The mixing area is more troublesome. I have a few questions to ask you for the sake of all audience and also industry point of view. First thing is always, you're talking to Asian countries. There are two things they always look at is, of course, as you know, the legislation is not that stringent. Sometimes they don't know what is the parameter to measure the odor control, what is the thing. And the second is that what is the investment cost in there? Can you talk about the cost information about installing, particularly in the mixing area, which is, I think, that major small producing section in the entire industry?
Yeah. We also have some units in Asia. We have units in Thailand and in China. Legislation is, for example, in China quite strict. So a lot of not only tire companies but all kinds of companies have to comply to very strict regulations. I think comparable to what is in Europe and some other countries. For the mixing industry, depending on the volume flow rate that you need to treat, and of course also the odor concentration and how much odor reduction you need to achieve. So sometimes you only need to achieve 50% to comply to legislation. That will be enough, and sometimes you really have to go higher. But on average, I think the investment costs are about 160,000 euros for a unit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how about, you rightly mentioned about you have a lot of particles, particularly in the mixing area, and it may affect the filters. What kind of maintenance issues are there to keep this your unit to run for a long time, or so?
Yeah, to avoid problems with our unit, we have a pre-filter. So we filter the air before it enters our system. And those filters, this is quite a simple and basic filter system. Those filters can also be purchased locally. So it is quite easy for clients to purchase those filters, and also it is very easy to replace those filters. It is no need. There's no need from Aerox to go there and replace those filters. So that's quite simple. And then the air is clean. It's by the filters, and then it is going to the plasma modules, and there we create the oxygen radicals, which are then injected in the process duct, of course. So and our equipment is not in contact with the process air, and therefore there's no risk of contamination of our system.
And you mentioned you have done a couple of projects of course, in China and in Thailand. What kind of problems or challenges you experience in implementing the projects in Asia?
Yeah, in many cases it is quite challenging. For example, in China to achieve enough odor reduction, because it is very strict, the odor regulations. And what we also see is we are dealing with multinationals, so they also have a certain standard. So the major tire companies, they have a certain standard, and they want to implement this worldwide. And therefore, in some cases, it doesn't really matter in which country you are and which odor legislation there is, because, for example, I will not say any names, but a certain producer just wants to have a standard for every factory, wants to treat the odors just in Thailand as good as they do it in Europe or in America. So, and that is I think quite quite good that those companies will not only act on the legislation, but want to have a worldwide standard on this.
So you are specialist in the odor control. Which country has a stringent legislation on odor around the world?
Yeah, I think it is. It varies a little because in Western Europe and especially in the Netherlands, it all started, and from the Netherlands it spread to other Western European countries, and some of the countries they have taken a more pragmatic approach, of which I think is quite good. So they don't only look at emission, but they listen more to the people around the plants. So if there are no complaints, then it's okay. And I think this is a very good, pragmatic approach. But I think at this moment, China is one of the countries with the highest, or the most strict regulations. It is good to see that there's a lot of groups are formed at this moment. I am also going to Latin America sometimes, and especially in some countries already in Latin America, they have also introduced odor legislation, and it is going like an oil piece all over the world, and that is good to see.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of development there.
It's also, what about the calibration of your equipment? Is it easy to calibrate? With the indicator, it's not like, ppm or solid particles to measure. It's odor olfactory is a different ball game, as I understand. So how is the calibration of your equipment, whether it is showing the right smell or odor or not?
Yeah, that is difficult. So our first calibration is with the pilot test. So with the first test, we can say, okay, this is if we have this capacity, then we will achieve this odor reduction. But of course, the clients, they also have different types of ingredients, different types of products. Sometimes they produce passenger tires, then motor tires, So there will be differences. And if you want to make a good calibration or more validation, you can do odor concentration measurements during the production of several tests. And also the equipment can be turned in stepless settings up and down. So you can quite easily adjust the amount of radicals that will be injected into the process duct. This is something that we have developed last year. So if you know that you are producing a product which contains or which emits less odor, you can tune the unit down. And the advantage is that you also consume less energy. So this has a direct influence. But it is very difficult because you have to do odor measurements, and odor measurements, you have to do it with your nose, olfactometry. It needs a panel, so you don't have direct results. So it is that is a little bit well, it's not very simple. You don't see a direct results by, oh, I tune it down. What is the result? I tune it up. It takes a couple of hours before you can see the result.
And also this odor problem, or we call a foul smell problem, is a lot to do with the perception of the persons. Each person is a different way of their sensitiveness, and particularly when people, companies, neighborhood. The problem is always the neighborhood complains about the smell problems. Okay, then the way they see it as a smell, the way you as a measurement is a different thing, right? You know, because the perception sensitiveness of the people, and also weather conditions. When you have cold weather, whether it's rainy time, you feel a lot of smell. Okay, and when it is hot weather, you don't see much smell. So there are many conditions, you know. So in dealing with this, it's a very challenging task, as you think. Is it right? Yeah.
Yes, that's absolutely correct, and it is also correct that in the first part that COVID came here in West Europe, it was just before summer, 2 years ago in March, and so a lot of people had to stay home at that time, and but it was beautiful weather, so people were sitting outside in their garden. And what we saw was that there was an enormous increase in complaints, odor complaints, because the people didn't go to work and sat in their offices, but they sat at home with the window open or in the garden, smelling the factories. And so that was also a problem in that time. Yeah. Now that is. That's absolutely correct.
And you have a solutions for the, I think it is, see, what are the solutions? What you present is indoor, like in a one source point, you know, one point, in particular point of source. But if there's outdoor odor problems, or you know, do you have solutions as well? Only the in point of source only.
No, it is only point source. Yeah. So if you, for example, have an open pile of garbage or whatever, then that is not something that we can treat. We really need to treat the odors coming from a process and which is in a duct. Yeah, which is yeah.
So thank you very much, Marijn. It's very interesting. It's interesting talk to learn about how to control the odor, particularly the mixing, curing, you know, batch of places. I think it's very useful. If somebody wanted to take your service, Xerox, do you have an office in other parts of the world, or only in Netherlands? How do you service?
We have an office in the Netherlands, and but we also have partners in Asia, Latin America, all over the world actually. So they can always contact us or via our partners locally.
Sure. Marijn, thanks a lot. Appreciate the time and a really interesting presentation. I look forward to seeing you some other time. Thanks a lot. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that's the end of the presentation and discussion on the odor control in rubber and tire industries. We learned some technology as well as the challenges involved with odor control in rubber and tire industries.